Welcome to the complete animation of Ellie from the 2022 animated film The Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. This movie has such a mouthful of a title, and it's a really interesting movie. And I haven't seen it since it first came out, and the only reason I'm making this video right now is sort of a bit of mild facetiousness, bit of a joke, whatever. And I think that this movie isn't all that bad. It has glaring issues with its production values, but at the same time, I think that this movie punches a bit over its weight, a bit above its weight with the qualities that it does have. Because if you look at the quality of the character animation in this movie, you can see that it really isn't that high budget. This movie wears its budget on its sleeve. This is the modern equivalent of a straight-to-video sequel. And not just any straight-to-video sequel, a low-budget straight-to-video sequel. You look at The Secret of Nim 2, that is, one of the textbook examples of straight-to-video sequels that came out in the late 90s and early 2000s. And this movie is basically like that, but made, post 2020. And I think that there's actually a lot of interesting things that you can see in there. Just the quality of tools that are available to CGI artists these days are able to put out some, all things considered, really impressive results. Like the lighting and the fur in this movie is something that is in many ways better than, the really bigger budget Ice Age movies like the first Ice Age or The Meltdown. Like this scene right here where they're talking around a campfire, I think that the lighting here is actually pretty appealing. There's a whole bunch of areas where it really shows, how low budget it is. Like the actual flames themselves don't look that good. But the light that is emanating from the campfire and playing across the scene, I think it actually looks pretty darn cozy. And the fur in this movie, it's often pretty rough in terms of, the way it moves and stuff, but when characters are standing still and their fur is there, I think it actually looks all right. In many ways, I think that the fur even looks better than the original Ice Age's fur did. And there's other issues with the animation in this movie, like the scene where the mom T-Rex shows up for the first time in this movie. Holy cow, you can see her character model falling apart a little bit. There's part of her leg where it's the different parts of the model are actually coming apart and you can see the seams, which I actually find a little bit endearing, because you think about the conditions that this movie was probably made under. This is a feature-length movie. This is it's not a short movie. This movie is well over an hour long. And having probably a small studio filled with probably the not top talent, I think that all things considered, they did a pretty good job. And you think about the kind of people who would have worked on this project. This isn't the top tier, animator who lives in California and is paid a California salary sort of animation. I'm not sure where this was animated. It probably was animated overseas, because that's where you get the cheap animation labor from. But this probably was many people's first animated movie that they worked on. Where it's if if you're an animator and you just barely got out of, school and you're entering the workforce and you could only find a job at this studio and this was the movie you worked on, I think that you'd probably be pretty pleased with your work, especially given the time constraints. My guess is this movie didn't spend very much time in production. My guess is it was written very quickly and produced almost as quickly as well. And with all of that in mind, I think that this movie is actually pretty good. And the thing I don't like about a bunch of the discourse around this movie is everybody just says, "Oh, this is just a cash grab," and Blue Sky would never have made something this bad, and woe be the end of Blue Sky. It's like, yeah, the studio shut down, and yes, this movie wasn't made by basically anybody who had anything to do with that movie. But even so, like, I don't think that it's completely devoid of any and all merit. And the fact that they got different voice actors, that's fine. Like, it's not like the voice actors are the only thing that matters. And I think it's interesting the details that they decided to keep and the details they decided to omit from the earlier movies when it came time for the big recap. At the beginning, because it's like at the very beginning they're like, oh, here's the story of the first ice age, and that's the first time that humans have ever been mentioned in this franchise since the first ice age. It's like, it's actually pretty impressive how humans were actually a really big part of the first ice age, but for every other thing in ice age you would never know that humans even existed in this world. It's interesting that this movie of all of them is the first one to even acknowledge that they exist. But it also completely ignores the fact that Peaches exists, or Shira. And I think that that's all right, because I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again when the sixth, big official theatrical Ice Age movie comes out, that this series is really full of a ton of characters. There's so many characters in this series. I don't even know. And yeah, so the reason I made this movie is because I have one guy on my Patreon who is obsessed with this character Ellie, and he was like, no, don't you dare make a complete animation of Ellie from the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. And just to tease him, I decided to make this movie. To make this video, because I don't know, I like to see people squirm a little bit. But as for coming back to see this movie, I think that the biggest problem is that it isn't actually the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild. It's actually the Ice Age Adventures of Crash and Eddie, who go and meet Buck Wild all over again. It's like, if you're going to call it the Ice Age Adventures of Buck Wild, it better be about Buck. But he doesn't even show up for the first, 15 minutes of the movie? And just like every other Ice Age movie, the opening sequence, the first 15 minutes of this movie is the weakest. It's not until later that you even find the villain. It's not until later that you get to the more interesting part of the world. Yeah. Yeah, I think that this movie is overhated and even in many ways underrated. I think that a bunch of people haven't even seen this movie and they get all their opinions secondhand. It's like, why can't more people, subscribe to the idea that you can't judge a movie unless you've seen it? It's like, you can say, oh, I've saw the trailer and I didn't like what I saw there, but you haven't seen the entire movie. And there are plenty of times where I've seen a trailer and disliked it, but ended up watching the entire movie and really liked it. And yeah, I think that more people should only judge movies that they've actually seen. But watching their favorite YouTuber say a movie sucks, it's like, you haven't seen it. Thanks for watching.